Hi, and welcome to another video on object-oriented programming in C#. With me, Marinas Toman. Okay, so in this video we will look at exceptions in C# and the try-catch block. So when executing C# code, different errors can occur. Coding errors made by the programmer, or errors due to wrong input, or just other unforeseen things. So when an error occurs, C# will normally stop and generate an error message, and it'll throw something that's called an exception. So similar to Java, this is just an error that will be thrown at runtime if something tries to execute and something goes wrong. So one of the ways that we can handle, if there is a part of code that we know is generating an error, or if we know ahead of time that it might generate an error. So for example, file input and output, you might ask the user to put in a file name, and whenever they put the file name, whenever they enter the file name and you try and put the file doesn't exist, for example, and you try to get a file that doesn't exist, it's going to throw you an error that says, this file doesn't exist. You're trying to open something here that I don't know what you're trying to open. So in examples like that, what we can do is we can use this try-catch block. So it really does what it says on the tin. It tries a piece of code, and then if that piece of code throws an error, it catches that error or catches that exception, and then we can handle the exception in whatever way that we want. So we don't have to let the execution or the program just basically fall down and stop executing and just stop. We can handle whatever we want if we want to display a message to the user or whatever it may be. So the try statement allows you to define a block of code to be tested for errors while it's being executed, and then the catch statement allows you to define a code to be executed if the error does occur in the try block. Okay, so if there is an exception thrown, then it's caught in the catch block, and these always come in pairs. So usually the compiler will give you an error if you try and have a try block without a catch, because it's saying, well, if you want me to try this, then you have to be able to catch if I throw an error here. So in this example here, so we have a integer array with 3 numbers in it. Okay, so the indexes that exist here are just 0, 1 and 2, but on this line we're trying to get index number 10, so that's way outside of the bounds of the array. So what's going to happen here is it's going to generate an error. It's going to throw an exception, and as you can see, the error message will look something like index out of range exception, so the index was out of bounds of the array. So you've probably seen this before, if you've been working with arrays before, and maybe you loop, maybe you're trying to loop through an array, and the loop goes too far, it goes beyond the bounds of the array. So in this instance, what we can do is we could surround this with a try-catch. So if an error occurs, we can use the try-catch to catch the error and execute some code to handle it. So let's say that we had this example again, but we put the try-catch around it, so we tried this piece of code first, and then any exception that was thrown, what we can do is just write out to the line. So it's going to, this is the variable name for the exception that's going to be thrown, just called E for exception, or error. And then what we can do is we can look at the message itself. So this part of the exception, this is basically saying this is the class that threw the exception, this is the type of exception it is, and then this is the message that's come along with it. So what we're doing here is we're just saying, well, let me see the message, and so the output will just show what this message is. Index was outside the bounds of the array. So what you can do is, you could also create your own message. So you could just print something out to line, if it was some generic exception or some exception that didn't have a type, it wouldn't really have a message. It might give you just like a hash code or something. So what you can do is just, give a message to the user, something that's a bit tidier, or so the exception isn't kind of just showing the underlying errors, that you're kind of making it a bit tidier, so you can just say, oh, something went wrong, there's been an error here. So the finally keyword is something that lets you execute code after the try catch, basically regardless of the result. So even if there's an error or not, the finally will execute either way. So let's say in the try block we had a piece of code that didn't throw an error, then the finally would execute, and if we had like this example where it is going to throw an exception, then the finally would execute as well. So the output in this case will be something went wrong, the try catch is finished. So sometimes there's things, again, this is really useful for when you're working with files. So sometimes you want to try and take a file in, if that file name exists, and then catch an error. If it doesn't exist, it'll throw an error, so you want to catch that, and then you might want to close the file writer or something like that. So you might want to do some tidying up, regardless of whether the file was found or not. So the finally is useful, but it's optional as well. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be included. Just the try catch will work without it, but sometimes it's good practice to have it in. So the throw keyword's another good one, where what you can do is you can create your own exception, and you can throw your own exception. So let's say you create your own methods, and so we'll go through an example here where we could create our own method, and then if some condition is broken, or if some you could do test some piece of data, or test the parameter here, and then just throw a new exception. So this allows you to create your own custom error, and it's used together with the exception class. So there are many exception classes available, like the arithmetic exception, file not found exception, index out of range, timeout, and so on. So in this example we could have a method called check age, and it just takes in an integer, which is the age, and then if the age is less than 18, we could say throw in an exception saying you must be at least 18 years old, access denied. Otherwise we could just say access granted. So if this method was called and the age was less than 18, what's going to happen is this new method, or this new exception is going to be thrown, and the method is just going to stop executing at that point. So if we done this, like this example here, check age 15, then it would just throw the exception and the method would finish executing. If age then was 20, you wouldn't get no exception or no error at all. And once an exception is thrown, if it's not handled, if it's not caught, what will normally happen is the execution of the program will just stop then, and it won't go any further, because basically the program can't get any further if there's been it's a fatal error when these exceptions are thrown. So if you come over to the exception class in Microsoft, you can see some of these classes that use the parent class exception. So these are all kind of the different types, like file not found, and this is the condition that must be met. So just a description of what if the condition is not met, so file does not exist, then this is going to be thrown. Or if a drive is unavailable or does not exist, a drive not found exception will be thrown. So what you can do later on, when we start to learn about classes properly, you can start to see that you can extend the exception class, and instead of just throwing out your own message, what you could actually do is create your own type of exception, and have your own message and everything then. Okay, so that's everything for exceptions. Okay, so that's everything for the video. Thanks for watching.